Hello and welcome to the crux of medtech. We go beyond the buzzwords, bringing you the insights from the innovators, investors, and leaders who are driving this life-saving space forward. Because I'm absolutely fascinated by the stories that people have to tell in medtech. As someone who works in this sector on a daily basis, I come across so many interesting people and so many interesting stories that I think the world deserves to know about. Welcome to the crux of medtech.
Hello, Neal, and welcome to the Crux of MedTech.
Hey, Henry, great to be here.
It's honestly so good to have you here. We obviously met at LSI recently, and as soon as we were sat at the bar, hearing your story, I was like, this guy needs to come on the podcast and tell our audience. So, first of all, I really want to dive into the founding story. So, Luminoah, why does it exist?
Yeah, we exist to change the standard of care for people that have chronic illness that can't eat and drink by mouth, that need enteral nutrition therapy. And I wasn't expecting to start a medical technology startup. I was a CEO of another company back in 2019, and I had twins, and both of which those twins are healthy and 9 years old today. But when our young boy Noah was 3 in 2019, he got sick. He ended up having a tumor in the base of his skull, and one day was perfectly healthy, and he started coughing a lot, choking on his saliva, and did an MRI and found the tumor, which changed our life forever. We were suddenly a cancer family, and going through chemo for uh, close to 2 years at UVA Children's. And so, as a result of where his tumor was, he couldn't eat and drink by mouth. He was aspirating, and so he needed a feeding tube. So, for those that aren't aware what enteral feeding is, it's essentially feeding directly to your stomach, either through an NG tube that goes through your nasogastric pathway, or directly into your stomach with like a peg tube or a gastrostomy button. Imagine like the end of a beach ball that where you blow it up. That's what it looks like here, right there in your stomach, and then you connect right in. You could syringe or gravity feed, or you could use pump therapy. And pump therapy is really important for folks that need kind of a slower flow rate. So for Noah, he started out at a really slow flow rate, around 60 ml an hour. You need about 1,000 ml for someone his age. Typically, about 1 ml equals 1 calorie, or you can change the calorie count as well. So with the current standard of care, uh, Noah came home with an IV pole based pump, that requires a head height. So you've got, if you imagine, if you've been in the hospital, you see all these infusion pumps, right? You see a big box sitting there on a pole, a bag hanging above it. And that's what enteral nutrition is today. Nothing's really changed in the past 20 years. And that technology, came from the hospital into our home. And so now Noah, who was normally a 3-year-old running around and just playing with his twin sister, was now tethered to an IV pole getting feeds 8 to 10 hours a day plus overnight feeds at our home. And so you can imagine just seeing him on the couch. To his left is the IV pole, the bag hanging. We'd pour in cans of nutrition, prime out all the air, and then attach to his stomach, and then you sit and wait. And so his whole world was changed from one day to another. We tried the backpacks. There's ways you can hang the bag in a backpack above the pump, and we just would get a lot of false alarms and occlusions and issues, and it's really heavy, and so that didn't work for our family. And then the other issue was, my wife's family helped support us, and you've got multiple people coming in to feed, and there's no data tracking on these pups. And so each day we were handwriting logs when grandma and grandpa gave a feed, when my wife gave a feed versus myself. And last thing you want for an immunocompromised person is to now be malnourished. We later learned that if you're malnourished with a chronic illness, you have a 5x increase in mortality. In the U.S. health system, many of these patients end up readmitted into the hospital, uh, and that hospital loses about $17,000 in that readmission. It's a long duration stay, and it's just a bad outcome for patients. And so I couldn't believe that here we are in 2019, and we have a technology that, one, can't give you reminders of when to give a next feed, but two, isn't tracking your feeds. And then the last issue is that the current technology has about 6 feet or about 2 meters of tubing. And as you're walking around with the IV pole, that tubing's around your legs. And so one day Noah's walking and stepped on the tubing and it pulled the gastrostomy button right out of his stomach. But if you can imagine just the excruciating pain, um, kind of pulling on the inside of your stomach lining. Vixie cringed just thinking about that moment, and that was our reality. We later learned that this is the reality for 3 million people around the world, and we met other families at UVA Children's going through the same issue, and it was in that moment that I knew we couldn't control the outcome of Noah's uh, disease state and whether or not the chemo would work. We had great faith in the clinical community at UVA, but what we could control was how people experience enteral therapy. And I think, in life, when you feel like life's out of control, you control what you can.
Mm.
And for us, it was solving this problem. And so, um, You know, I spent most of my career in healthcare at Pfizer, working, in the US and around the world with different products and later in the devices, and could get up to speed pretty quickly on a new disease state. So, started asking doctors about the current state of care, started interviewing other users of enteral therapy, and we didn't want to start a company if it was just the problem, like if others weren't experiencing what we were facing. And 6 years later, we've talked to over 1,000 people to get inputs, but we wanted to make sure that this was truly an issue and a problem that needed to be solved. And then once we made the decision to do it, we needed to name it, which was when Noah rang the bell at UVA Children's Hospital. There was a painting of a rocket ship, and we talked a lot about space. When you're getting chemo for long periods of day, you've got a lot of time to talk and
Sure.
hang out. And we bought books on space, and Noah was really fascinated by it. And so when looking at figuring out a name, we merged illumination to measure light between stars, and Noah's name Luminoah, to create a brighter future for tube feeding. And that was 6 years ago this week.
That's incredible. Do you know what? I just wanted to start with that story because it's the founding story of a company is so important. But when you've lived such a big challenge, like that allows you to then build out something that means something. It's very, very personal, this challenge. So we've heard a little bit about your experience here, but when Noah talks about this experience now, like what does he say about that experience going through that cancer journey, but also the feeding side of things? How does he talk about things?
And it's really interesting. He's now 9 going on 10. And, he was such a champ, going through all this. In those days, it's really scary. You've got a port in your stomach that each time you're getting chemo, that you're inserting into that port, you getting a lot of medicines that are going through your feeding tube. You have a lot of doctors and nurses coming in, and it can be a very scary thing for a child or for anyone, right? And I remember last time you got your blood test, but I flinch,
Mm.
when I'm just getting the needle, but you're being pricked at quite a bit, as a child. And he would he loved Spider-Man. He would sometimes dress up as Spider-Man and go in and embody that he was a little superhero, and he would, try to, like, bring joy to the clinic. We were on the 5th floor of the oncology building at UVA Children's, and, like, it was almost like his mission to brighten other people's day. Um, I'll never forget, when he was first admitted to the hospital. We didn't know that he had cancer at the time, and, um, but they had admitted us on the floor, and he went around with a little cape. He saw other kids that were being treated for cancer and other issues, and he's like, "Let's go cheer them up." And I remember him walking around with the IV pole because they were giving him a just, saline at the time, and he would walk around with a cape. He's like, "I want to cheer up these kids," and then next thing you know, we get the news that he had cancer, and but he continued to embody that spirit throughout, and did it with, kind of a lot of grace um, and strength. I think, having a really strong community around us helped with that as well. Our kids always said growing up, our house faces east, and the sun rises up over the mountain here, and they would always wake up early and say sunny days ahead, and that became our mantra throughout. And so, no matter how hard those days were, we'd always say sunny days ahead, and that kind of has always carried our family forward, that mantra. And when Noah reflects back on this experience today, he remembers it. There's also some memory gaps of that time, right? Going from age 3 and just naturally what you forget. Um, but what's really exciting today is, like, him and his twin sister and the entire family is really engaged with what we're building. They come by the office. When I do a pitch event on the West Coast, sometimes they'll come with me and we'll hang out on the weekend because, last thing you want is to, be away from family all the time when you created a company to help people. Um, I'll never forget the day that Noah was diagnosed. We came home. It was very abrupt, and we had a cleaning person that usually comes, and came home to get some clothes. And I called the cleaning person. I said, "Please don't come," because I didn't want any of his toys to be moved, because we didn't know if we were going to be able to bring him back.
Wow.
And so, it's those moments that remind you that, every day is a gift. And I remember in those moments saying, we just have more time together. And so, as you build a startup and as you build a company, your family expands, right? Because every person, once we're FDA cleared, and we can unpack that a little bit, um, you know, they'll be treated as their Noah, as part of our family. And every decision we make as a company on the technology, you have to say, would we put this on Noah? Would you put this on your parent or your child? But yet, as you grow, as you move forward, you get pulled away from family more, right? And so you have to balance that. And so, we're once we're FDA cleared, we'll talk a little bit more about the product, but we're going to have an early access program. The family will be there to see the first people that get this pump, and so they're very engaged with the company, the mission, and so it's a real privilege to be on that journey with the family.
That's so cool. And where you're at right now is a pure kind of testament to where the strength of someone has come from. I do want to go back to that day when you found out he has cancer. As a family, I can't even imagine how tough that day must have been. But from your side, like, what was the mode you went into? Were you trying to be as pragmatic as possible? Were you trying to be as strong? Were you holding it together on the outside, or was it kind of breaking it down? Just give me a bit of an idea about how that day was.
Yeah, certainly on the day that we got the news, had the MRI. We're sitting in the recovery room, and I just remember an oncologist coming in. Well, first there was one doctor that came in and said, a doctor was going to come in and talk with us. And I remember sitting there, and uh, an oncologist comes in and says, we found, a tumor in the base of the skull. And it was almost like Charlie Brown, episode where the teacher's mumbling, where everything, you hear words, but you can't understand and comprehend. And you suddenly feel that, the room's kind of closing in on you, in this moment. And, you know, Noah's in the room with us, in recovery. And you clearly have to keep it together in that moment. And so you were fortunate, my wife and I were able to keep it together. And then it's you 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 process, right? Obviously you're very emotional. But then you've got to advocate and in that moment, right? You can have the best care team and be at a research hospital and have, world class healthcare professionals, but you also need to start advocating. You need to figure out what's the plan, the path forward. And in life, life's time bound for all of us, right? The start and the ending, and we all go through hard, difficult times in that journey, and everyone deals with that differently. And for us, it was like putting together a plan pretty quickly, because we first had to figure out what was our doctor said the issue, the tissue is the issue, right? You got to get a biopsy to figure out what it is so you can get a treatment plan. And then once we had a treatment plan, it's really fortunate, to also have this background with Pfizer, in that I could research clinical studies, figure out who thought leaders were in a space. And once we learned the type of cancer Noah had, um, I started doing some research. There's a Dr. McLean, out of Texas Children's, who um, was like the world renowned kind of leader in the type of cancer Noah had. And I called Texas Children's, or the website, with a phone number, and I'll never forget the day, Noah's in a medical coma, or medically induced coma, and we're sent to ICU. There's probably 15 infusion pumps there. It's, a really difficult situation. And I remember calling this phone number, and the gentleman picks up and said, "This is Dr. McLean." And I didn't expect him to pick up the phone. I thought a receptionist, or it would be a call-in number. I just started crying, and I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know I was calling you directly." He's like, "No, I published my cell phone number for parents like yourself." And I said, "Well, I'm the dad of, Noah, and here's our situation. And I read your clinical trials and saw that you had an approach to the treating this cancer." And he talked with us and spoke with our oncology team. And we were fortunate, our oncologist had a lot of expertise in this disease state as well, and so they got to coordinate and share notes. And they continue to follow up with us as well at Texas Children's, and calling, checking on Noah. So it was a pretty special thing, right, to see in a moment where we're going through something really hard, how children's hospitals work together, to ultimately help kids. And gave me, a lot of people talk about the complexities of healthcare, and there's a lot of brokenness, there's a lot to be solved. All that's true. But when you see the compassion of, you know, clinicians and the healthcare teams, and working together across institutions, it's pretty inspiring.
Wow. I want to take a minute to say thank you to our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical device development. With deep scientific and engineering expertise, they help medtech teams crack tough development challenges and make the right calls early, reducing rework, delays, and uncertainty later on. Whether you're navigating uncharted technical territory or racing towards market, TTP brings clarity and real-world judgment to the decisions that shape performance, usability, and manufacturability. By retiring risk early and grounding innovation in real-world constraints, they help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes. I'm not gonna lie, that just gave me chills just even hearing about that phone call. That is incredibly powerful. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm a bit lost for words really. So, so we maybe move the conversation on for something. So the actual technology approach that you guys have got is phenomenal, but you start with this incredibly big problem that means something to you and the family so deeply. So how do you start tackling that problem and understanding how you might solve for this big challenge that exists?
Yeah, so we started as a research project. So we knew we weren't building a company to make money. We were building a company to solve a problem. And and that gives you a different level of drive and a different level of focus of how you solve that problem, right? And so, in the early days, remember I was working in a family office startup, and a good friend of mine, Joe Andrasco, and I, whiteboard in the office because he does a lot of early stage investments, said, all right, before you start building, I'm going to assume you're going to figure this out. You're going to hire smart people and figure it out. Let's make sure that you could raise capital because as you know, as a med device, company, you have to raise a lot of capital. And he's like, let's whiteboard out what is the problem, what's the market size, can you get reimbursed? So we mapped that out on day one before even naming a company and deciding we're going to move forward. And then we realized this is a much larger problem than we imagined. I mean, there's as many enteral nutrition pumps as there are insulin pumps in the U.S., which you know is hard to believe. And then from there, it became a research project. So funded the company the first year, and we partnered with a local organization, Stevo Biohub, that does a lot of support for early stage companies. So they, brought us into a meeting where the FDA was there, so we got to understand regulatory pathways. We met a regulatory consultant there to help, ensure that this is going to be a 510(k) class 2 product, to better understand the capital requirements that would be needed to build this. And then, we met an IP lawyer, a general counsel, starting to get all the right people around the business in those early days. And then we had a partnership to be able to hire some interns out of UVA's University of Virginia's biomedical engineering master's program. I was gonna hire one person as an internship. At this point, COVID had hit, so it was you know April of 2020, and there was 10 people in the master's program at UVA that had all lost their internships because the Medtronics of the world's were not hiring, and so they were looking for an opportunity. And so it's gonna bring in one intern and ended up bringing in three because they were all amazing. And one gentleman, Hill Johnson, who's our founding engineer, was just extraordinary. He really took the project and as an entrepreneur would take it, right? And really thinking about the research of, what's the clinical need, talking to a lot of providers and users and really validating what the needs are and start to build product requirements around that. And then we hired a design firm and started like an industrial design firm. Probably went through, I don't know, I'm making up a number, but I feel like it's 100 drawings. We drew on Noah, dimensions on his body and where the button was and prototyping things. And, it was a really fun stage. And Zoom became a thing at that point, right? And so we participate in this organization, Oli, which has about 30,000 two-fed patients, and there was an annual conference that went virtual, so we got to talk to a lot of people through that organization. You know, Noah, Val, and our family told the team the story. We were interviewing everyone, putting all these notes in, and and then from there, we built a pitch deck, brought in someone from the business school, and then raised $1 million in seed funding a year after starting. At that point, rolled into a C corp, And so um, for there, we needed to get to a product freeze. So in the year two now, we wanted to focus on de-risking the company, de-risking the investment so that we could continue raising capital. More importantly, continue creating the best product possible. And so, um, so we what we had to solve, one is we wanted to create a pump that was so easy to use that you know people of all ages, whether you're 5 or 92, could use it. That it had a smartphone-like experience, and that it didn't look like medical equipment. That it could fit in your pocket. It was about the size of a credit card. Um, we wanted to be able to make a feeding set that really looked more like a go-go squeeze or a applesauce packet than a medical 1,200 ml bag that hangs in your home. We wanted to create a full data ecosystem that in real time you could see what's being delivered, get reminders about feeds, and have your clinical team have access to that. And we had to create a really robust pump that could pump, you know, formula that's highly viscous to something as with viscosity of water, and we needed to be able to do that against gravity, what we call 360 nutrition delivery. We didn't want to have the head height where the bag hangs above the pump. And those were all very difficult requirements to solve. But we didn't look at this as what's been done today. Let's copy it so we can get a product on the market. We just built. We started building, and we brought in a mechanical engineer who's just brilliant, and Landon, who just was able to really create some innovative technology that was later patentable. So we didn't have to work through we didn't look at the landscape of patents and say, what can we build to work around things? We just built something that we felt could work, and happened to be that it was all patentable. And so what we designed and built, and I'll show you here, um, was the world's smallest enteral pump. So it's called Luminoah Flow, because we want people to just go with the flow of life versus the technology, and um, keeping them at home. And so this is what the pump looks like. It's kind of hard to see here,
Yeah.
but if you put my credit card in front of it, it's not much bigger than my credit card. You can see the my phone behind it. Um, and so it just swipe to unlock, and then you can set the feed setting here. And then there's a daily admin set that you replace every 24 hours. So instead of 6 feet of tubing, you have 2 feet. Looks more like an applesauce pouch that you'd fill up. And then the way this is worn is, I'll stand up here, is that it's this attaches here to a belt clip, or it can go in a fanny pack or a crossbody bag. And then the food pouch, which has 250 ml in it right now, just goes in your front pocket.
Wow.
This clicks right into the pump. And then this would go into your NG tube or to your butt in your stomach. So what's pretty amazing here now is, if you untuck your shirt, and I've got a kind of a tight fitting pants and jacket here, but like you'd never know that I'm getting a feed. And so now someone like Noah, instead of being homeschooled, can go to school, play on the playground with friends. We call it the monkey bar test. We want kids to be kids. Um, in our school, there's several two-fed kids who, while everyone's in the cafeteria, they're in the nurse's office on an IV pole getting a feed. So they're not socializing. We also want like an aging parent. Let's just say you have a mother who's got dementia, that might be fed by the bedside, and has this tripping hazard of an IV pole going. They should be in the garden, working the garden or being with friends and socializing. And so we really want people to be active. We want them to just live life freely. And that's how we call it Luminoah Flow. And what's pretty amazing now is that for the first time in human history, we've got a system that will autonomously track the feeds. Humans are not good at remembering what we eat. We're not good at documenting what we eat. I don't know about you, Henry, but I forget what I ate 2 days ago
Yeah.
for lunch or for dinner. And so now for the first time in human history, we've got a device that tells you down to the macro micronutrients how many calories have been delivered, what percentage of therapy you're hitting each day, how much water, integration into Google and Apple Health. You can see week over week weight changes, um, activity, output of calories due to activity, and so this our whole mission is to change the standard of care, and all this data will eventually go into a cloud portal called Luminoah Intelligence, where if you had 300 patients on this pump, you would see in real time the status. And if someone's trending to being malnourished, instead of finding out when they end up into the emergency room and that they have that 5x increase in mortality and the health system's losing $17,000, you can intervene right before that issue happens. And so uh, we're really excited about where this can go with overall human health. If you imagine, a lot of people with enteral therapy have sometimes 2 to 3 comorbidities, chronic illnesses. And, if you can eventually personalize the nutrition and the therapy, you can, our goal is to improve outcomes, optimize therapy. Noah was on a very sugary formula and he had cancer with a steroid. He was hyperactive. He should have been on a very different formula. He needs a different formula than someone with short bowel syndrome that has an absorption issue. And so our overall mission and vision as a company to not only create a pump technology that can allow people to live life and easy to use, but to change and personalize therapy and optimize therapy so that we can potentially, our vision is to shorten a disease state
Wow.
and improve drug therapy. And so we're getting close. And so really excited to be on this journey, and it's a real privilege.
Well, what I love about that is although a lot of design and time and energy has gone into designing that device, on the surface, it looks and feels like it's a simple solution because it feels natural, like those little apple sauce packets. Like you could imagine a child wearing that and that just going, and it's just like, hey, it's not outside of the ordinary of what exists in real everyday life. So it doesn't feel like this big bulky piece of medical equipment that looks and makes you stand out, which as a child going to school is the last thing you want. So I think it's just an incredibly cool approach to it. And also the pump, you could have easily gone and tried to find a pump that fits your solution rather than designing from scratch. But the fact you've even managed to create something that is such a big piece of the equipment, but it's also, you can't even see it because it's just a part of the solution. So I think that's all really, really cool. What I wanted to go back to, because you kind of mentioned it early on in that last description, is when you had this already mapped out on the whiteboard at the earliest stage of the business. Day one, you knew what reimbursement looked like and things. Is there anything that was up on that whiteboard that fundamentally has been challenged throughout this journey? Is there anything that surprised you that's either in a good or a bad way about this the whiteboard and what actually happened along that route?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up a image because I took a picture of the whiteboard that day, and I was gonna see if I could find it quickly. If not, then I'll move on. But yeah, so we thought that the market size was proven, the breakdown of the market was validated. This is what the whiteboard looked like that day, and then let's see, we said it would take a range of investment. Literally, we hit the top end of that range.
Wow.
Literally, the exact number. Um, and um, and then we predicted about how long it would take to get there. And so uh, I'm very pleased. I thought it would take shorter, quite frankly. I estimated that when we put a range that we would be on the earlier part of the budget and the timeline. Um, but I'm really proud that we have been highly capital efficient. So we've raised probably half the amount of funding that the average medical device raises to get to a 510(k) clearance. So, um, but it was, we're been fortunate to have really smart people around us. You talk to founders a lot of times on these shows, and but it takes and founders get a lot of credit as a result, but it takes a village of really, really smart people. And the reason that this has been validated is because of the early investors and that believed in us, and stuck with us through this journey. The Every single team member that might have missed family events because they're working late to get this done and dedicating their life and their talent to this organization, and just incredible team of people. I mean, there's probably been. I mean, we currently probably have over 30 people between FTEs and contractors working on this, and I mean, we had a big celebration last December. This last one, 5-year anniversary of Noah being cancer free. There probably was about 100 people there, right? Friends, family, but also people that flew all from around the country to be there, that are engineers that work for us, that are board members, that are investors, that are doctors, um, and so it just shows that if you if you build something and you have a mission, and that your North Star is people, and that you're really solving something that really needs to be solved, and that everything you do goes back to the end user, um, and you make sure that when you're hiring, that everyone's mission aligned around that, like pretty remarkable things can get done. And so it's we created the mission, the vision, and have shaped it, but it's really taken a vision of people to make sure that what was on that whiteboard in those early days was actually achieved.
That's so cool. Do you remember the day when you realized we've cracked it, or we this is gonna work? What was the time when that happened?
It's been a lot of those moments because um, there's 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 a lot of ups and downs in this journey. Our last office that we had, we printed out on a piece of paper, um, a diagram that a lot of people have seen, which is this is what people think success is, which is a straight line of going uphill to a starting point to a finish. And then here's reality, which is, you start and then you fall off, a hill and fall to the bottom, and you're swimming and crocodiles are after you, and then you gotta climb back up, and you're figuring it out along the way. And there's been a lot of moments where it's like, is this gonna work? Right? And it's just you look in the mirror thinking, okay, are we gonna get this done? Are we gonna figure this out? And then there's other moments that are a high, which is we solved it. And I remember our mechanical engineer who designed the pump head, you know, he'd been noodling on this design for about a year, and then just over a weekend printed out the design and had, kind of a makeshift benchtop solution to show that it works, and it worked. And that was a big moment, but you don't want to celebrate too much because then you got to make sure it hits requirements and spec. And there's a lot of molding and things that you have to go back and forth to validate. And that part takes longer than, yeah, it's the solution. And then there's a long tail beyond that to make sure that it's spec. And so those moments are really big. That was, probably, um, all the years of running together 3.5, 4 years ago when we had that design. Um, but the pump has looked very different over the years. I was at a design thinking class at UVA talking the other night, and had all the different prototypes with me, from day one to now, and evolved quite a bit. Um, but I don't ever feel at peace, in the sense of accomplishment. I'm always feeling the weight of, like, until we get clearance, until pumps are on humans and that we're getting good feedback. And then as we grow, I think that weight will continue to build and lighten in ways because, now our family is extended to potentially tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people that are going to have this technology, and that I want to make sure that they have the best experience possible. And so we've got to obsess and be focused as a company to make sure that we have really good supply, we have really good quality of supply, that we're getting good feedback, that we have good customer service, um, that every single health system, every single home care company is treated as a partner, not as a transaction. And we're here to solve problems together, and that we're all in this together to improve the lives of people. And every single person we hire has to have that mindset. Obviously, you got to grow sales, you got to get return on investment, you got to bring shareholder value. If you do all those things right, that will happen. And so I don't ever feel at peace because there's so much to be done. Yeah.
So I know exactly how you feel on that point. So what about what comes next excites you the most? What is it about the next year, 2 years, 5 years that really gets you going?
Yeah. So we're in a really pivotal moment as a company right now. We're 6 years in, and we're under active review, and so assuming clearance here, we we have an early access program that we'll start. And um, we've had a lot of voice of customer feedback over the years, and really broad interest for what we've built, as we're getting feedback from um, many health systems and providers, and um, clinical nutritionists, and so forth. And so I'm just really excited for the day that we um, get cleared, and then the whole family's going to be with me and our team. The first patient that gets this, the first site. I just visited a site that we'll be at here soon, and I'll probably be pretty emotional that day, right? We want to have a big celebration for these families and celebrate every health system that once we're cleared and we move forward, that we celebrate them as a big moment. And so I'm just really excited about getting knowing how much love and attention every team member is put into this product to get it into the homes of patients. And so that's what's driving us, and get a lot of nervous energy, and for that moment. And it's like a kid waiting for a birthday, right? It's like that's how we're feeling right now, because we're getting really close.
Very good. And where are the biggest risks moving forward? Where can this go wrong, and how are you planning for those risks?
Yeah, it's execution at this point. You've got to make sure you've got really good supply chain that you're building up. You have good manufacturing partners, that you're building out your in-house capability and external capability within partners. Because if you anticipate very, very strong demand, and especially going into a space that hasn't seen any innovation in a very long time, um, to meet that demand, you've got to have really good supply chain. And so we've got to get that right, out of the gates. We've got to make sure our customer service is top notch, right? And that we're there for our partners and for our users. And then And we got to make sure we're building out the commercial team the right way. I come from a commercial background, for about 20 years of my career in healthcare. And we've got a lot of really great commercial leaders around us that are very familiar with this space. But making sure we're selecting the right people. I don't anticipate we'll need any recruiters. We've got, a lot of talent that want to work with us as we're building this, and but making sure that we're hiring at the right cadence, executing on the right strategy, um, and assuming that we solve those two problems and make the right decisions. Um, you know, I feel really good about where we're heading. We have to continue monitoring headwinds, right? That are macro level, where it's looking at any reimbursement changes that could happen in the future across healthcare, and not particular to our space. We have to monitor things like tariffs and what that can mean, right? As we're selecting partners, and be mindful and thoughtful. But those are just things that as part of the playing field, right? And so, just being strategic and thoughtful in each decision that we make, and so th- for us, I feel really fortunate. We've got really experienced people in each of these areas around us. So I have high degree of confidence in that team.
Excellent. Well, from my side, absolutely best of luck on the journey moving forward. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with that we haven't discussed today so far?
Yeah, I just say if you've got listeners that are thinking about building a med tech or a device company, it has an idea in mind, has experienced a problem. Um, you don't have to have it all figured out at the beginning, and yeah, I hope our story is an inspiration that although I come from this healthcare background, that I wasn't looking to start a startup. As a dad, um, that saw a problem, and you know we 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 just said, let's go, let's do this. And you don't have to have it all figured out on day one, and you know um, dive in, and then just reach out to your community around you and your ecosystem. And then as you move along, make sure to support others along the way, because there's a lot of people that you know show up and just there to support, and just make sure that as you get further along, that you're helping others that are in those earlier days. So just lean in, and just make it happen if you're listening, and you're on the fence.
Awesome. Well, Neil, thanks a lot for joining me. I've really enjoyed the story behind this one, and I think our audience will love it too.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Crux of MedTech podcast. If you're not already doing so, please go ahead and subscribe on YouTube, or follow the podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Crux. Crux is a medtech search firm which places pioneers in transformative roles to help us live longer, healthier lives. We do 3 things for companies. We help hire world-class executive talent. We help companies raise investment from Series A to Series C and execute upon M&A. And we also are building a community of medtech leaders to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and accelerate the companies to help them go faster. If you're interested in any of those 3 things, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or follow the link in the show notes to find out more. Thank you.